Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is TowerGate Day 525, Monday, August the 20th, 2018. Thank you so much for tuning in. Well, it is Monday, so let's go ahead and get started with the Dumbass of the Week. The Dumbass of the Week, and this week was a no-brainer. This week's Dumbass of the Week, also a first-time winner. This would be Al Not So Sharpton. That's right, Al Not So Sharpton. Well, in an effort to pay tribute to Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul, Not So Sharpton misspelled her big hit tune from 1967, R-E-S-P-E-C-T. So he's trying to pay tribute to Aretha Franklin, and he's got these like block letters, and he's got R-E-S-P-I-C-T. He can't even spell respect. And that's pretty disrespectful to the Queen of Soul, don't you think? You misspell one of her biggest hits? It's disrespectful, I think. So in an effort to pay tribute to Aretha Franklin, he misspells the word respect, one of her biggest tunes, and then goes on to rip Trump. Now, I think actually Trump knew Aretha Franklin and they were friends, and I actually, best I can tell, they were friends. So, the fact that he would rip her is also disrespectful, because if in fact Trump was a friend of hers, then that's not very respectful of her. I don't know if Al Not So Sharpton knew her. He probably didn't, be my guess. So there you go. Al Not So Sharpton, the Dumbass of the Week. You're a dumbass. And this guy was in Congress for a long time. He should have been thrown in jail for tax fraud. They found him with a bunch of money in his freezer, avoiding taxes, but of course, based on his characteristics, I guess they didn't want to press charges. So Al Not So Sharpton, highly overpaid, very, very, very dumb individual. Very dumb individual. He's probably not much smarter than Maxine Mad Max, Nancy Pelosi, Ocasio-Cortez. I mean, he's probably right in that same high 70s, low 80s IQ range that they're all in. He can't spell R-E-S-P-E-C-T. I mean, how about that? I mean, it's one thing not to be able to spell a word, because it could be a difficult word. It's a tricky word to spell, like anti-disestablishmentarianism or something like that. But here you have a word like respect, and what's crazy about it is the song actually spells out the letters. It's actually R-E-S-P-E-C-T, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. I mean, she actually spells out the letters in the song, and he still F's it up. My, oh my. Dumbass of the Week, Al Not So Sharpton. Rudy Giuliani was on with Maria Bartiromo this morning, and he was talking about the fact that he would waive his entire salary, his entire fee to Donald Trump as his attorney, if he could have the opportunity to do the deposition of Mr. Potato Head, John Brennan, after he files his lawsuit, which he's not going to do. Says he's going to take legal action because he lost his security clearance. He can't take legal action over that. The president, if you read Article 2 of the Constitution, the president is not just the head of the executive branch and everybody works for him. He essentially is the executive branch. He can fire anybody for any reason. He can certainly pull your security clearance, especially when you have a background like Brennan has, when you are saying the things he is saying. In fact, he's actually opening himself up to being a target of foreign espionage. He's opening himself up to be a foreign target. He's openly proclaiming, obviously, his hatred for the president, and that would mean the 60+ million people who voted for him. He doesn't seem to be very happy about the country. It would be very easy for a foreign spy, an attractive female Russian spy, for example, or Chinese spy, to turn Brennan. I mean, if you're in the CIA, these are the types of things, or the FBI, and you're worried about someone being turned, these are exactly the type of things that you look at to see, hey, this person's got a lot of information. He still has that security clearance. He's wigging out. He's obviously has a lot of issues. I mean, these are the very types of things that you would revoke a security clearance for. But yeah, Rudy Giuliani's like, yeah, let him go ahead and file that lawsuit, because the very next thing that happens is we get to depose him. And I would love to depose him so much that I'll actually take that as payment for legal services to the president. In exchange for legal services, let me do the deposition of Brennan. There's a lot there. You know, he too was not, it wasn't just Rodenstein and Mueller. Brennan also had a role to play in that Uranium One deal as well. Even the unwitting idiot, unwittingly, even the unwitting idiot, James Clapper, has taken a nasty swipe at Mr. Potato Head, John Brennan. Clapper was on CNN with Jake Crapper, and he said that Brennan's anti-Trump rhetoric has become, quote, an issue in and of itself. Brennan's anti-Trump rhetoric has become an issue in and of itself, according to the unwitting idiot Clapper. Now keep in mind, it was probably Brennan who got the unwitting idiot Clapper to go along with a lot of the shenanigans and the frame-up, and probably it was Brennan who put Clapper up to leaking the briefing to CNN, which gave them the news hook they needed. That was probably orchestrated by Brennan and delegated to Clapper. Now, Jake Crapper asked the unwitting idiot Clapper if, quote, Brennan's hyperboil is an issue and one of the reasons we are having this crisis, unquote. The unwitting idiot Clapper said, I think it is. Clapper says that Brennan is like a freight train, and he's going to say what is on his mind. I wouldn't compare him to a freight train. I'd just compare him to a blowhard of some sort. I mean, you know, and it just shows he's unhinged. What's really actually going on here is Brennan is unhinged because he knows that the coup plot that he was one of the ringleaders of is being exposed day by day. New information is coming out every day, and he knows where it all leads. Right back to him. He knows that Comey, Peter's been stroking us, Andy, McCabe, and all three have been fired and are under investigation. And eventually, the pressure on them will likely get them to expose his role as the ringleader in the plot. And of course, we have silly Sally Yates, who, along with Mr. Potato Head, is sweating bullets. Yates was Bruce Orr's boss, and she signed off on the first 2 FISA warrants on Carter Page, as well as the warrant, which I think she did with a national security letter, on Michael Flynn. So yeah, Brennan is sitting back watching all what we're watching and what I'm covering here every day and what we're all learning every day. And he knows that eventually it's going to continue every day. More and more and more comes out. And eventually it's going to lead right back to the original coup plotters. And he would be in that trifecta, along with the Right Reverend Clinton, Barack Hussein Obama, and John Brennan. They were the primary ringleaders. And all the people who are being interviewed were all under them in that second tier. The 23 witnesses that Nunes asked Goodlatte to interview are all being called in and interviewed. They're second tier. And some of them still work at the DOJ or the FBI. And they'll be pretty much have to answer questions. Then you have the ones who are not. They can plead the fifth, but it makes you look awfully guilty if you do. And it draws more attention to you. But ultimately, this is all going to shake itself out, and Brennan knows it. And he knows when it does, that he is going to be exposed as one of the ringleaders. And that's why he's acting as crazy as he is acting. He's a man who's watching the day by day. It's like him, every day he takes one more step down the plank, knowing good and well one day he's going to reach the end of the plank. And he will have to be, of course, he'll be shark bait when he reaches the end of the plank. And every day he takes another step down the plank, closer to the end, where destiny awaits Mr. Potato Head. As I just mentioned, silly Sally Yates is sweating bullets because she, when called into question, and she will be called in to be deposed, will likely plead the fifth. She no longer works for the DOJ. But Bruce Orr, he still works at the DOJ. He doesn't have much choice. He's got to answer some questions, not just to Inspector General Huckleberry Horowitz, but to the members of Congress who will be interviewing him on the 28th. Bruce Orr is going to be asked directly, tell us, Mr. Orr, did your boss, Silly Sally Yates, know about your ongoing communications and meetings with Chrissy Steele? Did she know? Or were you doing that without her knowledge? Did she know that your wife worked at Confusion GPS and was hired to help assemble the phony dossier? Did she know, did Silly Sally Yates know, Bruce, that you were taking information from your wife at Confusion GPS, who was also being fed fake information from Chrissy Steele, who was also in direct communication with Bruce Orr? So they would ask Bruce Orr if Sally Yates knew about that trifecta going on between Steele, his wife, and himself, and that information was finding its way into the counterintelligence operation. And they're going to ask him if he ever was in a meeting with Peter's been stroking us and passed any information, documents, verbal information, or anything like that to Peter's been stroking us. They're going to ask him if Sally Yates knew about that and if she was in those meetings. You see, there's a lot of very difficult questions that Bruce Orr is going to have to answer. And if he implicates Silly Sally Yates, his boss, he says, oh yeah, she knew that I was meeting with Chrissy Steele. She knew that my wife worked at Confusion GPS. And she knew that there was a trifecta of information coming from Steele and my wife, and that it was being funneled into the counterintelligence operation run by Peter's been stroking us. She knew all of it. She knew every bit of it. My boss, Silly Sally, was in on the meetings. She knew it all. She was copied on the emails. She was well aware of everything. This is what Silly Sally fears. Because, again, Bruce Orr works for the DOJ. He's got to answer these questions. She can come in and plead the fifth, but by that time, what they need to know from Bruce Orr, they're going to learn. And Bruce may try to lie, but they've had Lisa Page in there, loose Lisa Page, and it appears that she was somewhat straightforward with them. And I'm sure they've asked her if, I'm sure they've asked her if she knew about in these meetings, who was involved in these meetings. And if Bruce Orr or Sally Yates, if they learn from interviewing Lisa Page that Bruce Orr and Silly Sally were involved in these meetings, involved in the information sharing, aware of this information flowing through Confusion GPS, Nellie Orr, Christopher Steele, flowing into the counterintelligence operation. If they learned that from Lisa Page, it's just another source. They have multiple sources who are all going to be asked, all these people working at the Department of Justice, the FBI, the 23 that were on Nunes' list, they're all going to be asked this, so that by the time Silly Sally Yates and J. Edgar Comey and Andy McCabe and Peter's been stroking us, by the time they get back to them to question them about all this, they will have already interviewed all of these witnesses. They're also going to have the court deposition from Christopher Steele, which is going to be given to them by Mr. Gubarev's attorneys. They're going to have a lot of information, which is why Silly Sally and Comey and Ben Stokeness, the next time they find themselves in these deposition hearings, they'll probably plead the fifth. Because if they don't, they'll incriminate themselves with their answers. They're all going to jail anyway, because they'll eventually be in front of a grand jury. They'll likely not testify. But there's going to be plenty of evidence that will be brought against them to prove that they did know they were part of the coup plot, that they did lie to the FISA court. Sally Yates signed off on the first warrant on Carter Page and the second, and was probably the one who instigated the national security letter, which got Flynn. And she unmasked Flynn. And she unmasked many other people, private American citizens. What was the cause? I'm telling you, Silly Sally Yates is in a lot of heat, because it was the players underneath her, just underneath her, that were doing the dirty work. The people above her. Do you think Get Back Loretta Lynch is going to cover for Silly Sally? You think Obama's going to cover for Silly Sally? You think the Right Reverend Clinton's going to cover for Silly Sally? Do you think J. Edgar Comey is going to cover for Silly Sally? I don't. She's at the wrong position on the totem pole. And I do believe that, in the end, she's going to get the high hard one. From Comey, from Lynch, and all the rest. Doesn't look good for Silly Sally, and I think she knows it. That's why when you see her on TV, she, like Brennan, is unhinged. Black business ownership under Trump is up. You ready for this one? 400%. Now we know why. His approval rating amongst blacks is anywhere from, we had one day 32%, the very next day another poll 37%, somewhere in the mid-30s. If Trump is in the mid-30s come November, or even a little higher, he might be right. There might be a red wave. It definitely won't be a blue wave. The Democrats cannot win nationally across the country, with Republicans getting in the 30-some-odd% of the black vote. And the Latina vote's up also about 10 points as well. Not as high as the black vote, but it's up pretty high. Those are the two main groups that carry these big states, like California, New York, and things like that. This could be devastating, absolutely devastating. If that number is accurate, and that black business ownership under Trump is up 400%, and his approval is between 33 and 37, could be higher by election day, by midterm election day, November. I mean, we're looking at, like I say, I mean, this is catastrophic for the Demo-Commie Party. This is their base. This is how they win elections or lose. Absolutely amazing. The Gateway Pundit, Jim Hoft. The FBI and the Department of Justice and the Democratic National Committee all sought dirt on Trump from former MI6 agent Christopher Steele while he was being paid by the Russians, meaning Mr. Deripaska. So it now appears, a lot of people believe, I don't think we have the actual evidence of that, I don't think he's admitted to that, I don't think anyone is admitted to that, but the evidence seems overwhelming that Deripaska might have been paying Christopher Steele to lobby for him on his behalf. Because we have the communications between Chrissy Steele and Bruce Orr, where Chrissy is basically lobbying for Deripaska. he's saying, yeah, I mean, I think Deripaska could really help out the investigation in the States. And hey, Bruce, can you keep an eye on that situation that's going on, whether deciding whether or not to give him the visa, whether or not to decide to let him come into the country to attend this conference? So clearly you have Christopher Steele obviously lobbying on behalf of Deripaska. Why would he be doing that? Well, Mr. Deripaska has a lot of money. Wouldn't be any problem for him to drop 6 figures on Chrissy Steele to lobby for him. He knows that Chrissy has got a direct line into Mark Warner on the Senate Intelligence Committee, which is one of the primaries that are making that decision at the time, debating that. His lawyer, Mr. Waldman, is the intermediary between Mark Warner and Assange and Steele and Deripaska himself. And he's being paid. Why wouldn't Chrissy Steele be getting paid? But he's doing it for his health because he cares about poor billionaire Deripaska in his sad situation? I don't think so. Chrissy Steele was out to make a buck any way he could. Slandering a president who he hated, or a candidate who he hated and didn't want to see become president. Taking money from a Russian oligarch who may be able to supply some fake information, which he eventually did not do and would not do and laughed about because he's a billionaire. He's thinking farther beyond that. He didn't have this great hatred for Trump. He's just self-interested. What will solve my problem right now? I want to get into the U.S. So, it's a very interesting article. Again, it assumes a fact that we don't yet know, but let's face it, there's overwhelming evidence, and you have to ask, it's common sense, why was Christopher Steele lobbying Bruce Orr on behalf of Deripaska? Usually it's because you're getting paid. If he wasn't getting paid, then what was he getting in return from Deripaska? To argue on his behalf, to lobby on his behalf. Christopher Steele, didn't he also say that he had written a series of articles on behalf of Deripaska? To say, hey, Deripaska is really a great guy. He's really not connected to the Kremlin. He's not one of the cronies. Yeah, he knows Putin. They're friends. Of course, Putin knows all the billionaires. He one time, Deripaska, one of the richest men in the world, certainly one of the richest men, if not the richest man in Russia. Of course, the president of the country is going to know the richest billionaire in the country, especially because he's involved in an industry that's critical to the economic well-being of the country. Obviously, they know each other. And have mutual shared interests. But do you think Christopher Steele's sitting around writing articles, passing them out to media organizations to portray Mr. Deripaska in a good light? That he's working feverishly with his friend Bruce, the number 4 man at the DOJ, to help lobby on Deripaska's behalf, to help him get a visa to get in the country. He's doing all that just out of what? Out of the love of his heart? Out of the goodness of his heart? Come on, man. I agree. We haven't seen the check. We haven't seen the bank account deposit, but I think you could be about 90% sure that Steele was being compensated in some way by Deripaska, and possibly even Waldman. I mean, Waldman was actually representing Deripaska. He was also representing Steele and Assange. He was getting paid very handsomely. It could have been Waldman who said, hey, you're my client, but I got my other client's Deripaska, and he's paying me to lobby on his behalf. I can't think of anyone, right now who has more input or could have more input and could have more, something to say that might sway the Senate Intelligence Committee and the other people who are looking at Mr. Deripaska's visa. Hey, Chris, would you like to pick up a few extra bucks? I got plenty of them, and so does Mr. Deripaska. So Adam Waldman, we now have, who I'm just was speaking of, Adam Waldman, who was, of course, the attorney for Assange, for Steele, and for Deripaska, who was involved in a lot of these emails between, and was a subject of a lot of these emails, between Bruce Orr and Chrissy Steele. he is, of course, they're wanting to interview him in this joint committee in the Congress, Goodlatte and Gowdy's committee. And of course he knows this, so he's avoiding it by making sure he stays out of the country. So in a letter, in an effort to have Mr. Waldman come in and answer some questions, Mr. Waldman did not respond. His attorney did. Wrote a letter, and you can read the letter. It's on Conservative Treehouse. He wrote a letter basically saying, well, my client's real busy right now. He's taking care of business. He's got clients over in Europe, and he's over in Europe, and he's going to be in Europe for quite a while. I don't know when he's coming back. Now, typically, Waldman will go to Europe a couple days, come back to the States. He never stays there very long. He lives here, But he's making sure that he stays the hell out of the country for an elongated period of time. He doesn't want to come back and answer any questions. He doesn't want to come back and talk. He doesn't want to come back and be a part of any of it. He wants to hide outside the country. Now, he can try that, but I'm telling you that he's not going to hide outside the country forever. He has family, he has business interests back here in the States. He can't stay in Europe forever. And Congress will most likely issue a subpoena to him. And they'll be watching. And if he comes back to the States, if he wants to stay in Europe and essentially be locked out of the country, because he knows if he comes back, he'll be picked up, forced to come in and testify. But it tells you a lot that Mr. Waldman does not want to testify. And Mark Warner is probably shaking in his boxers, thinking about the fact that Mr. Waldman may come and testify. Remember, we've only seen some of these bits and pieces, excerpts of these 302s. There were 12 or 13 302s with Bruce Orr. And Mr. Waldman also has his own texts of people he was speaking with, and we haven't seen all of them. The Inspector General Huckleberry Horowitz is probably looking at that stuff, and I imagine it will be subpoenaed at some point by one of these committees looking into it. Mr. Waldman, you can run, but you can't hide. Eventually, they're going to drag your ass in there and talk. And eventually also, you too, Mr. Waldman, you are going to find yourself in front of a grand jury. But again, they're going to interview Deripaska. They're going to interview possibly Assange. They're most likely Steele. They're going to get to all these guys. They're tougher to get to, but they eventually will get to them. And at that point, Waldman will have to testify just to defend his own self because of what we learned from those interviews. You can run, but you can't hide, Mr. Waldman. Your nuts, like Mr. Potato Head and many others, are going to be roasting over an open fire as the snow is falling, as the Christmas bells are jingling later this year, after the midterms. There's a lot of trouble coming for a lot of these people, particularly Brennan, Yates, and the rotten Reverend Clinton. You can bet on that. Byron York in the Washington Examiner. Mueller wrote this memo regarding the sentencing, the recommended sentencing for Papadopoulos, where he's recommending 30 days for Papadopoulos because apparently, this is what Mueller says in the memo, is that Papadopoulos not being forthright in his answers to the FBI hindered the investigation. That's a joke. That's a joke. And everybody knows it. This is why Mueller's also got a lot of problems as well. He's essentially falsifying a government investigation. He's actually producing a fraudulent investigation. He knows that this is not true. He knows that, a lot of the things that he's doing here after the fact, when all the evidence is out and the truth is out, it's going to reveal, in fact, that Mueller himself was part of the plot as the cover-up man, the guy to come in and clean up the mess, kind of like the Horowitz guy, the cleaner, the guy to come in and clean up the mess. He's got a lot of problems as well. Uncle Bob the Executioner and the Hillary donor posse. They'll need their own lawyers and time. And maybe he'll find himself in solitary confinement. But what's interesting about the memo, the Mueller memo regarding the sentencing of Papadopoulos, is that if you look at the memo, And they're saying, okay, he needs 30 days for obstructing our investigation. Essentially, what Mueller's memo does is it casts Papadopoulos as a bit player, as just a very, very, very minor little player on the fringe. And the problem with that is that at this time, even though the FBI or the DOJ have not come out and totally admitted that Papadopoulos and that Papadopoulos Downer meeting was the reason that they launched the counterintelligence operation, they haven't come out and admitted that, but of course it was they who leaked that to the New York Times. They leaked that to the New York Times because at the time everybody had been saying, oh, the dossier was the reason. And the dossier was just getting absolutely shredded for a period of about 2 or 3 weeks. It was getting shredded as more evidence was coming out about who paid for it, who was behind it, who participated, the sources now saying they weren't, that they didn't say the things being attributed to them. The dossier is getting shredded. So the DOJ and the FBI panicking, Mueller panicking, so they thought, oh, we better do something. We better change the subject from it was a dossier to it was a Papadopoulos Downer meeting. So they leaked to the New York Times this story about the fact, oh, guess what, folks? You're talking about the dossier being the reason for the FISA warrant, being the reason for the investigation, this and that. Oh, well, you're all wrong. It wasn't that at all. It was this meeting between Papadopoulos and Downer. That's why we launched a counterintelligence operation on July 31st against Trump and his campaign, launched FISA warrants against everybody, national security letters, the whole 9 yards, because of Papadopoulos and Down the Hatch Downer having a conversation. It was prearranged by Downer's personal assistant. But Mueller makes Papadopoulos look like a minor player, just a bit player. So how does that wash with the narrative that we've been actually stuck with for the past, well, since what, May? I think that came out in May. So the dossier got totally shredded. They had to move to the Papadopoulos Downer meeting. Now that has been exposed as pretty much a fraud. Where do they go next? There's not really too much of a place they can go. That's why they continue to try to find anything they can to be the next thing that they can say was the reason. Because they still haven't produced a reason. They still have not produced a probable cause for launching all this. And that's why a lot of them are going to jail, because it's not there. They can try to manufacture it after the fact, but it's going to be very tough to do, because now the bloodhounds are on their trail. Nunes has crawled all the way up their ass and stretched out, along with Grassley and Gates and Jim Jordan and all the rest. They're occupying a large percentage of Mr. Mueller's asshole right now, along with Comey, McCabe, and all the rest. Silly Sally. Very interesting, because Mueller is going to be the case of record at the end of this. And if the case of record says that Papadopoulos Downer meeting was a minor infraction, is really not, had never had any major role to play. And of course, we know that they launched a counterintelligence operation on July the 31st, 2016, supposedly based on this, even though they haven't totally admitted to it. It's what's been leaked and suggested. They didn't get around to interviewing Papadopoulos until January of 2017. 6 months after they launched the investigation because of the Pops Downer meeting, they wait till that long before they even interview Papadopoulos? My friends, it ain't gonna fly, man. That's what I'm telling you. That's why I keep telling you every day. Lots of people are going to jail. Can John Cox defeat Gavin Newsom and become California's next governor? Oh yeah, certainly can. I told you all, I'm old enough to remember when California was a red state. Hardcore red state. And I think it's going to become a red state again. You have the gas tax, which is hugely unpopular, which Cox has promised to get rid of. Newsom supports it. They're entering into a recession in California. And of course, keep in mind, some of the bluest states in the country, Maryland, Massachusetts, Illinois, and Maine, have Republican governors. Very well could happen. Very well could happen. Remember, a lot of people, Trump wasn't supposed to have zero chance of winning either. A lot of people won't tell the pollsters who they're going to vote for. John Cox could be the biggest upset in this upcoming election in November. We'll keep following it. Thanks for tuning in. See you guys tomorrow. Bye.